For years, they called him a great man of God. People filled his church, hung onto his every word, and emptied their pockets just to receive his blessings. They believed he could heal the sick, raise the dead, and prophesy their destinies with divine precision. But today, he breaks his silence. It was all a lie. In this explosive confession, he revealed the dark secrets behind miracle ministries in Ghana, the stage healings, the scripted prophecies, the fake deliverances, and the massive money-making schemes that deceive millions. Today, he takes you deep into the world of false prophets, where faith is just a business, miracles are performances, and the truth is buried beneath a mountain of deception. This is the confession they never wanted you to hear. Watch till the end to uncover the shocking truth that will change everything you believe. Like, comment and subscribe to Dangerous African Confession HD for more untold truths from behind the pulpit. Do you think miracle ministries are real or fake? Let's discuss in the comments.
I would talk to you and expose you to what experienced prophets demonstrated: how to make someone appear demon-possessed, how to push just the right spot on a person's forehead to make them fall backward, how to apply pressure to a person's neck in a way that made it look like they were choking without actually harming them. Others specialized in prophecy. They taught how to gather information on people without them realizing it, how to make vague statements sound divinely inspired, and how to use psychological manipulation to make people believe in supernatural insight. You see, I have spent years standing on the pulpit, lifting my hands, declaring healings, and watching crowds erupt in shouts of joy. My name used to echo across in Ghana as a prophet, a man of God anointed with the ability to perform miracles, deliver people from sickness, and prophesy about their lives with astonishing accuracy. But today, I lay everything bare before you all. I confess that it was all fake. Yes, so let me start the whole thing this way. When I started my ministry, I was a man of genuine faith. I can say that I did all the things that you would expect a pastor to do. I fasted, prayed, and spent nights crying out to God for power and direction. I wanted to see lives transformed. I wanted to be a true vessel of God, bringing healing, hope, and restoration to those who needed it. But no matter how hard I prayed, no miracles happened. Let me say that I remember the early days, standing before a small congregation in a borrowed church hall. The place had only a few plastic chairs, and most Sundays, we barely filled half of them. I preached my heart out, but at the end of the service, I saw something different in the eyes of my members. They had come expecting breakthroughs, instant healings, prophetic words, and signs from above, but all I gave them were scriptures and encouragement. Other churches were growing rapidly. Their prophets were making headlines with testimonies of the blind seeing, the lame walking, and the barren conceiving. Crowds flooded their auditoriums, bringing with them generous offerings and sowing large financial seeds in expectation of miracles. Meanwhile, my church remained stagnant. I was barely surviving, struggling to even pay rent for the space we used. I remember one day, I visited a well-known prophet's church, just to observe. What I saw that night changed me. The service was electrifying. The prophet stepped onto the stage, and before he had even spoken, people were already shaking under the power of God. He called out names, exposed secrets, and healed the sick with dramatic gestures. A woman who had entered the church in a wheelchair was suddenly running across the stage, screaming that she had been healed. The entire congregation exploded in wild praise. I watched in amazement. Was this real? Could God truly be moving through this man so mightily? I wanted that power. I must tell you that I wanted to command such authority in the spirit. I wanted my name to be known, for my church to be filled with thousands, for people to look at me and see a true prophet of God. After the service, I met one of his junior pastors. What I learned over the time talking with him shattered my faith in everything I thought I knew. The miracles I had just witnessed had been staged. The woman in the wheelchair. She had never been sick. The prophetic revelations. They had been gathered before the service. The moment of divine power I had been in awe of. Nothing more than a carefully crafted performance. At first, I resisted the idea of deception. I told myself that if God had called me, He would provide. I would wait for His timing. But as the months passed and my situation worsened, I began to doubt. Church attendance kept declining, offerings were small, and I was struggling to take care of my family. Then came the final breaking point. This woman who had been coming to my church for months, believing that God would heal her daughter, who was suffering from a severe illness. She had sold her belongings to sow seeds into the church, believing that her financial sacrifice would provoke God to act. But nothing had changed. Her daughter's condition had worsened, and now she was desperate and broken. She looked at me with expectation, waiting for a word of reassurance, for a miracle, for something to prove that her faith had not been in vain. I had nothing to give her. No miracle, no prophetic insight, no divine solution. That night, I lay awake, tormented by the reality of my situation. My ministry was failing. People wanted to see evidence of God's power, not just hear about it. And if I couldn't give them what they were looking for, they would leave. You see, my brother, there is limit and a point to anything a man can take. And that was when I made the decision. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted my church to grow, I had to do what the others were doing. I had to create the miracles people needed to see. The following Sunday, I announced a special healing and deliverance service. I had never done anything like it before, and my heart was heavy with uncertainty. But I had already taken the first step. There was no turning back. I reached out to one of my trusted young guys that I know, a young man who had been struggling financially. I had a meeting with him, and we came to conclusion on what I wanted him to do for me, which he agreed to do. I told him what I needed him to do, to pretend he had been suffering from a severe leg injury and then, at the right moment, rise up and walk as if he had been miraculously healed. I promised him a reward, which is money, to help him with his rent. The service was packed. More people than usual had come, excited by the promise of miracles. When the time came, I called the young man forward. He limped to the front, leaning on a crutch. I laid my hands on him and shouted prayers of healing. Then, just as rehearsed, he dropped the crutch, took a step, and then another. His face lit up with joy, and suddenly, he began to run. The church erupted in celebration. People wept, screamed, and threw themselves to the ground in worship. That day, I received more offering money than I had ever seen in my ministry. That day, I realized the power of performance. And that, my brother, was the day I fully stepped into the world of deception. Okay, then let's talk about how we go about the deception and miracles. Once I took that first step into deception, there was no going back. The moment I saw how the crowd reacted to that stage healing, the way they shouted, danced, and emptied their pockets into the offering basket, I knew this was the formula. People wanted proof of God's power, and if I could not get it supernaturally, I would manufacture it. At first, I kept things simple. I used only some few members around my life when growing up, who needed money, instructing them to pretend to have certain illnesses and then act healed when I laid hands on them. But as the church grew and expectations increased, I had to be more creative. A single healing here and there was no longer enough. People wanted bigger, more dramatic miracles. The pressure was immense, and I needed to keep the momentum going. So now let me lead you into what I did. I built a team of trusted individuals who handled different aspects of the deception. You see, some of them were responsible for scouting and recruiting people who would act as the sick, the crippled, the blind, or the possessed. Others were tasked with gathering background information on new attendees so that I could prophesy accurately. Everything had to be carefully coordinated to maintain the illusion. And that is what makes it difficult for the members to believe even when you know the secret and you tell the members about it. Because the illusion was made to be real in their face. I never for once thought that finding people to participate in stage miracles would be easier. But people out there were more corrupt than I thought. Ghana has many struggling individuals, young men desperate for jobs, women looking for any means to survive, and even people who were already involved in street performances and minor scams. I paid them well, and for many of them, this was just another job. Some pretended to be crippled, using crutches they didn't actually need. Others acted as though they were blind, covering their eyes with dark shades or walking hesitantly as if they could not see. Some even pretended to have tumors or internal pains, crying out in agony before suddenly receiving healing on my command. You see, before each service, we would meet with them in a private room and go over the performance. I explained how they should act, when to respond, and how to make their healing look real. Timing was everything. If the reaction was too fast, it would seem fake. If they hesitated too long, the crowd might grow suspicious. They had to find the perfect balance of disbelief and joy, acting as though they truly couldn't believe what had just happened to them. You see, my brother, one of the most powerful performances we ever staged was a woman who pretended to be deaf and mute. She had never spoken a word in church before, and everyone knew her as the silent sister. But on the day of the service, after I laid hands on her, she suddenly screamed, "Jesus," and began to cry uncontrollably. The church exploded with praise. People rushed forward, throwing money at the altar. That single stage miracle brought in more money than any offering I had ever seen before. Oh yes, my brother, it was all built on fake. Things has become more attractive and I needed to improve. So, as time went on, we started taking things even further. We staged one of the most extreme miracles possible, which is raising the dead. Of course, I couldn't actually bring a corpse into the church. That would be impossible. But what I could do was find someone who was willing to pretend to be dead. This miracle, I watched a service by a South African pastor, who raised the dead in his church, and I decided to also do same and see how far it would go. We selected a man from outside the church, someone no one would recognize. Before the service, he was brought into a private room and laid out on a stretcher, his body covered in a white sheet. His instructions were simple: stay completely still, do not react, and breathe as quietly as possible. When the moment came, I had my assistants carry him into the auditorium as the choir sang mournful songs. I declared that this man had passed away earlier that morning, but by faith, we would bring him back. I prayed loudly, shaking his body, calling out his name. Then, right on cue, he gasped and sat up, his eyes wide with shock. That day, the church went into chaos. People were screaming, falling to the ground, running up to touch him. They believed they had just witnessed a resurrection. It was one of the most powerful deceptions I ever pulled off. But what they didn't know was that the ambulance that brought the man to the church was all paid for as part of the act. This was to make the thing more believable. The supposed wife's testimony was that he was not feeling well that day, and on their way to the hospital after they had called in the ambulance, she felt the need to push for the driver to first pass by my church before they visit the hospital. This is because she saw her husband dying right in her arms as they were going. So, when they first drove in on the compound of the church, most of the people that had come to church saw them. And when the man was taken from the ambulance to the office, they all saw him and the wife. My brother, to tell you the truth, what I have done in this number of years that I have proclaimed to be a prophet is not an easy thing. If you see the number of properties I got from doing this trick as far as the church is concerned, you will be shocked. I must drop this one on you here and now. You see, for a long time, I believed I and the other pastor I talked about earlier were the only ones faking miracles. I thought I had stumbled upon a dark secret that no one else knew. But let me tell you this secret. As I climbed higher in the ranks of Ghana's prophetic circles, I discovered something even more disturbing. Almost every well-known prophet was doing the same. What I had thought was a personal struggle turned out to be the foundation of an entire industry. Miracle ministries were not built on faith, they were built on deception, manipulation, and the exploitation of human desperation. At first, I assumed that some of these prophets had genuine supernatural gifts, that perhaps God had really anointed them differently. But as I got closer to them, as I was invited into their private meetings and secret gatherings, I realized the truth: most of them were just better at hiding their deception than I was. I can tell you here that there was an entire network of prophets across Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and beyond. They operated like a well-organized business empire. Some of them had powerful connections with politicians, businessmen, and even law enforcement. They weren't just preachers, they were power brokers, using religion as a tool to gain influence and wealth. We shared strategies with each other, exchanged tricks, and even trained new prophets on how to perform convincing miracles. There were secret seminars where young pastors were taught how to stage healings, how to prophesy with precision, and how to create a brand that would attract thousands of followers. Some of these training sessions were shocking. I watched as experienced prophets demonstrated how to make someone appear demon-possessed, how to push just the right spot on a person's forehead to make them fall backward, how to apply pressure to a person's neck in a way that made it look like they were choking without actually harming them. Others specialized in prophecy. They taught how to gather information on people without them realizing it, how to make vague statements sound divinely inspired, and how to use psychological manipulation to make people believe in supernatural insight. I realized that many of the biggest names in prophetic ministry were not anointed by God. They were simply skilled actors and master manipulators.
The truth is out. Now it's your turn to decide, do you think miracle ministries are real or fake? Let's discuss in the comments. He has confessed everything: the staged miracles, the fake prophecies, the money-making schemes, and the dark secrets of Ghana's miracle ministries. For years, he deceived thousands, building an empire on the desperation of innocent believers. But now, the truth is in your hands. How many more will continue to be deceived? How many more will give their last savings for false promises? This is bigger than just my story. Thousands of so-called men of God are still out there, performing the same tricks, collecting millions, and keeping their followers in spiritual blindness. Have you ever experienced fake prophecies or staged miracles? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share, and spread this message so others can wake up to the reality behind miracle ministries. Turn on notifications, because the truth is just beginning to unfold. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and above all, stay in the light.